So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Just to let you know, this meeting is recorded. This webinar is for accessible and inclusive workplaces. I'm just going to quickly run through some general housekeeping. So, as said, this webinar is for accessible and inclusive workplaces, supporting employees with visible and non-visible disabilities. This is a safe space. All of our webinars are safe spaces. All of our meetings are safe spaces. And with all of our meetings, all of our webinars, we will be exploring topics that you may or may not have had personal experience of. So we do ask people to only participate as much or as little as they feel comfortable, and if they need to take breaks. This has to be a space where people feel comfortable sharing their views. There's no judgment, but we do ask people to be respectful, and obviously stay away from pejoratives or name calling. It is confidential, as said, it's a safe space, so everything that's said here we'll try to maintain here. The meeting has been recorded for the first half. Once we get to the questions, we will sort of monitor that, and anything that's needed we'll edit out of the final recording. As always, your input is invaluable, so when we get to the questions at the end, please do interact. We do have some questions that some of you submitted beforehand, and we'll try to answer them. If we don't answer them in the call, we will be following up with an email to everyone with some of the more important questions that were asked. Just a bit about the Eco Group. Our mission is to unleash the full potential of organisations by identifying and eliminating bias in the workplace using data and technology, and our vision is to enable a business world without bias. This is a bit about our general approach to work. So we've got 5 stages: obtain data, identify gaps, set targets, implement interventions, and track progress. And then it's about refining, replanning, and repeating that process for every company we work with. We set us up to be sustainable for them without needing our ongoing support all the time. In this webinar, we hope to discuss what is disability. We hope to engage you on how to create accessible workplaces, improve disability inclusion, understand what ableism is, and get a bit of a Q&A at the end. I'm joined by 2 guests, so this will be a conversation between 3 people with their own lived experience and professional experience in this sphere. And on that, I'm just going to introduce them. So I'll do myself first and get myself out of the way. Allan, Reid, EDI consultant. My pronouns are they, them, and I am neurodiverse. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen and ask my guests to introduce themselves. And I'll start with Olga.
Hi, I'm Olga. I am an integrative counsellor. I help people to overcome anxiety. I help people to deal with their traumatic past. I have experience working in local authorities for many years in various departments, including social services. I was in disability forum for a while, and yes, I have a lot of knowledge in regards to disability, especially the ones to do with long-term illnesses and physical disabilities. That's me for now.
Thank you, Olga. And I will ask Lillie.
Hi, I'm Lillie. I co-founded Send It to Alex, which is a virtual support worker service for neurodivergent people. I'm neurodivergent myself. I have a diagnosis of autism and dyslexia. And we also have a social, so we're a B Corp, and we have a social purpose to bridge the employment gap for neurodivergent and disabled people. That's us in a nutshell.
Thank you, Lillie. So the big question at the start of this webinar is really, what is disability? So I'm going to come back to you, Lillie, since you last speak. For you, what is disability, either professionally or personally or both?
So I operate on the social model of disability. So while I was late diagnosed with autism, and up until that point, I'd never considered myself disabled, I understand the differences that I have, but appreciating that the environments that it is the environments that I'm in that impact on me, and the situations that I'm presented with that are disabling.
Yeah. So I suppose like a way to think about that is that most people see physical disabilities as the most obvious disability. So if you think about a person in a wheelchair, if the world is designed to accommodate the wheelchair, there's ramps, there's drop curbs, there's lifts, like their disability doesn't really impact them that much because the world accommodates that. But you're saying that with neurodiversity, the world has not been designed to accommodate it because it's, for a large part, very misunderstood. It's not very well understood yet by the majority of society, and that workplaces and society aren't designed to really accommodate that.
I think so. I think we're a long way. There are lots of organisations and people that are doing amazing things in this space, but we are a long way from understanding how neurodiversity impacts on an individual and how that is inconsistent, and understanding how to support people to thrive in the workplace.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I'll come to Olga. For you, what does disability mean?
Hi. Well, I'll have to go by what the law says, the disabilities, but I'm also aware that people have preferences in regards to how they choose to describe themselves, or whether they want to even disclose if they have a disability, because by law, people have the right not to disclose what disability they have. And some people choose not to talk about their disability. And sometimes if the disability is acquired during life, sometimes it's difficult for people to adjust to it. So some people choose to live as they lived before they were diagnosed. So that's their way of having control, having some strength and abilities to look themselves for the way forward. For some people, it can be difficult to adjust, and sometimes they need some support. Unfortunately, some people don't have enough support around them, because the support is needed from the family, friends, and workplaces. And sometimes those things are not available or not in place. So it can be very tricky for people, because lots of different feelings and emotions come up with it. Anything to do with anger, isolation, segregation. So yes, so it can be quite tricky how to support people, or how they want to be supported. And sometimes it's difficult for people to articulate how they want to be supported. Sometimes it takes a while for them to work out what it is that they need and what works best for them. And if the condition is fluctuating, then that needs to be adjusted as well quite a bit. So it is a process. It is a process. With some conditions, obviously, there is deterioration. With some conditions, maybe improvement sometimes, and a lot of fluctuation, not only in terms of the physical abilities, but emotional and practicalities. So there is a lot to consider, and it's quite individual, I would say, how people want to be with it.
Yeah, so disability is often unique to the individual, and how that presents itself, and how they handle it as well, and how they want to handle it. You touched on the legal definition of disability. I do just want to sort of spell this out. So under the government legislation from the Equality Act 2010 in the UK, you are disabled under the Equality Act 2010 if you have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal activities. That goes on to sort of give some breakdown about what they mean by substantial and long term. So substantial is more than minor or trivial, e.g. it takes longer than it usually would to complete a daily task like getting dressed. And long term just means anything lasting more than 12 months. So for me, I first found out that I would be considered disabled under the Equality Act when I was diagnosed with depression and had been suffering the symptoms for, at that point, about 18 months. I'd also been diagnosed with social anxiety like over a year before that. Since then, I've gone on to get a diagnosis of ADHD, so that adds to that list. Although I don't see that I'm as affected as some of the people I know around me that have like different conditions, different symptoms, or have had less support through their life. I feel like I've had quite a good level of support throughout my working career and education. So I want to come on to a little bit about what disability inclusion looks like. So I think we can then pivot this into that creating accessible workplaces. So Olga, for you, you have a background in social services, but you know you work as a counsellor. With those two areas of work, how do you think disability inclusion needs to work?
There are some similarities and there are some differences, isn't it? So I think the main point, the similarities are around finding out from the person what works for them and what doesn't work for them, and allowing the space for the person to work it out, because as I say, it takes time, isn't it, for people to maybe accept it. It depends again if people were born with it or they were recently diagnosed with it. So it depends on the situation. So it just giving the space for people to work out what works best for them. So I suppose in social services do look at social model and medical model. And I think in therapy, there is a drive to look at the social model, but I suppose some of the difficulties that people experience in regards to maybe pain management might come up in therapy setting, because sometimes pain might have an impact on the way relationships are experienced. And sometimes, obviously, people might experience discrimination or some kind of segregation in the workplace. That as well can be internalized and needs time to process. So counseling is more about emotional support, but of course practicalities come up with it, where social services, it's more about practicalities, I would say, than anything else. Other things can be recorded, considered, of course, but it's more about practicalities. So it depends what people need, what's their need for now. So people will choose to go for what is the need. Sometimes it could be that there is a need of both, really, as well as medical support from the doctors, for example, or occupational therapists. So it depends, really.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it is important to understand the different contexts of the social and medical models. But I want to touch on, you talked about people who are like born with a disability, people who are diagnosed or essentially acquire a disability. So if you think people who get into accidents, they lose a limb, they brain damage, or any other level of impairment that comes with an accident. People who are born with it, they grow up living the world with that, so they can adapt themselves and they learn how to live in the world with that particular condition, that impairment. Whereas if you acquire it, you've got however many years of your life not having had that impairment, and there's a grief process for the life that you no longer have. Is that something that you've had to deal with as a counsellor? Like,
yes, definitely. It is a loss not only of the life that someone had, is about a loss of dreams or plans, or maybe relationships, or maybe career. So yeah, it's a different impact, I would say. Yes.
Yeah, and then I'm really glad you sort of brought up the career, because that's, I imagine, the fear when you get a new diagnosis or you acquire an impairment, that you won't be able to work anymore, that your workplace won't be able to accommodate you. So it's really important that we understand the inclusion side of this, like how to include people with disabilities, how to design a workplace so it's more accessible. Before I come on to accessible workplaces, I'm going to let Lillie speak about what disability inclusion is for Lillie and the work that St. Alex do.
Thank you. So we've been doing a fair bit of research with a variety of organisations, looking at the HR process from attraction through to exit, and what organisations are doing to be inclusive. In particular, this piece of research is around neuro-inclusion, and it's still very new. Even organisations that are proactive with and have a good and sound disability policies and procedures, there is a big gap in what they're and how they're supporting neurodivergent people. So I think that in terms of where we're at and what we're doing now, there is still a long way to go. Even us as an organisation, where we are thinking every step of the way, what can we do here, and are there any barriers in this? We can't help but miss them, because we only have so much resource that we can pull on. There's still not enough research done in this area, and so there is a bit of trial and error. There is, however, a lot of resource that is great, that we can learn from. A lot of the work that has been done with, so one of the things that we learn through this experience, through this research, is that awareness training in the workplace isn't always effective, and can have quite a detrimental impact on the individuals who have disabilities, because how that is then perceived by their co-workers as it being like, oh, this is a permanent issue that we're going to have to deal with rather than a temporary, and therefore my work is impacted, or however that plays out in that particular workplace. So that we know doesn't work, but what we do know is that minor adjustments, having information around access to work is a huge gap, bridges a huge gap in terms of the support that people receive in work. And in small workplaces, I think up until about 49 people, don't quote me because I don't remember entirely, but you can actually get that support for your neurodivergent, disabled and people with long-term health conditions for no cost to your organisation. So being an inclusive employer for us is to be proactive in understanding what is available for us as an organisation to support individuals. And back to what Olga was saying about it being on the individual to understand what they need. Well, a late diagnosis of autism or ADHD or physical impairment, you don't necessarily know what is going to help you, because you don't understand entirely your own difference. So again, I think that there should be more of a responsibility and we should work harder as employers to understand what we can offer and how we can support people to help them understand where the challenges might lie and how they can be supported.
Yeah, so in terms of what you need to support you, I think if you have lived with a disability, if you're coming to a workplace with a disability and you've already had support elsewhere, you maybe are in the best position to sort of say, this is what's helped me before. However, as Olga mentioned as well, those situations change. There could be a change in your personal situation in regards to disability. It could be a change in your work situation in regards to responsibilities that you're delivering, which change the needs. When I was diagnosed with ADHD, or when I started going through the diagnosis for ADHD, I was still in my previous workplace. And the first response was, well, what does that mean? What are we supposed to do for you? It wasn't, how can we help you? It was, what are we supposed to do? Which I thought was very aggressive at the time. But I didn't know. I'd just sort of been told by someone who works as a psychologist that I should go and get a diagnosis, or I should go and seek a diagnosis. So I'd only just found out, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything about it and how I could get that support. So yeah, it's workplaces need to do more to sort of help employees work out what's going to work for them. And I've explained it to some people, generating a list of reasonable adjustments that have been implemented elsewhere, been implemented elsewhere, or have been implemented in your own company. That shouldn't ever be an exhaustive list, but it's a list of, these are things that have been tried and we know have worked for other people. Do you think any of these would work for you? Do you think these work for you, with some adjustments to how they're implemented? And treating it almost like a pick and mix, so they can go, well, those first three might actually work, but I need to take that fifth one and change it, and I don't think the rest would work right now. And then letting people sort of come back to it at different stages and saying, I actually want to change my adjustments because I don't think they're working for me, but I think actually I was wrong about that other one, and maybe it would work for me now. Or I've seen this one that my friend is using elsewhere that works for them. Do you think we could try it? And on top of that, the workplace has to be building up that expertise, as you said, consistently exploring their own understanding, building on it, and seeing what else has been used, not just in their own organization and not even just in their own sector, but across businesses. Every business in the UK has HR staff, has administration staff, has office staff. So what works for one office staff won't be exactly comparable for every other office staff, but gives you an indication of what might work. And then you can adapt that to suit their own personal needs and their own personal work environment. And I would just ramble unless someone stops me.
There is outside of the Equality Act, the what you can offer as an organisation is subjective. So there is you don't necessarily know that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, so there is a big part of this for employers is not knowing what is the right thing to do, so then being afraid to do the wrong thing, and then that causing biases, and then causing people not to want to employ somebody because they don't have or think that they can possibly support because they just don't know enough. That is a huge challenge, and I think there's evidence to say that that is helping keep the gap wide on people with disabilities in work or in paid employment. Around the idea of having adjustments or that kind of place where you can have a look and go, oh yeah, that would work for me, is a lovely concept. I think that
it's definitely a starting point. It's not an end point. It's not even a midpoint of the journey. It's like getting employers started on that journey.
Yeah, again, I think that it's one of those things where people are afraid, oh, well, what, like, where does this list end? So what if somebody picks all of these things, then what's that going to cost us? And again, down to cost. So there are reasons why people wouldn't want to use a list like that, use a list or give people the opportunity to kind of go through things like that. And again, so it comes down to a conversation and getting to know your team or your new team member or your existing team member if it's somebody who's already in the team, and just having that open conversation of like where we're at and where the challenges sit, and then exploring together how we're going to get over these.
Yeah, and it does have to be a balance between that affordability and reasonableness. And the reasonableness we were discussing, it's not just about how it positively impacts the employee, but the potential impact on their colleagues around them. So we were talking about the idea that they might prefer a dark workspace, so they need the curtains in the office drawn, and then the colleagues have to sit in darkness, or really rely on like the overhead fluorescent lights. Overhead fluorescent lights are terrible for me. Like if I sit under them for a full 8-hour workday, I'll leave with a migraine. So I get that it's where does the reasonableness end, and where does the affordability issue really start? And it's as you said, it's a conversation that you have to have, and a process every workplace will have to go through. I did just want to read through some statistics before we move into the creating accessible workplaces. So we talked about the definition of disability, but from the most recent government survey, the Family Resource Survey, I think this was a 2019 one, it suggests that 19% of working age adults in the UK are disabled. This was a few years ago, so I would actually hazard a guess that that's now a bit higher than that, particularly as we start to really understand the social model of disability and how we include people, and reduce the stigma, so people don't feel stigmatized as identifying as disabled. There's also other parts of these statistics that I find really telling. So there's total employment in 2019 for disabled people, it's 52.3%, compared to about 80% for non-disabled employees. That figure actually gets worse when you look at intersectional lens, and people from ethnic minorities are, I had a statistic, I've lost it. It was less than 50%. I think it was 49% of ethnic minority disabled people are in employment. So there's a huge level of inequality there. Like most disabled people want to work. And it's just about finding how they can access work. There's also issues where they're more likely to be in part-time work. And part-time work is really ill-defined. It's anything less than 35 hours a week. So that could be a 0-hour contract, it could be 4 hours a week, 8 hours a week. It could even be 30 hours a week, which is almost full-time, but it's considered part-time. So a huge difference between the employment rates for disabled and non-disabled people, but then also a huge difference for working styles and hours for disabled colleagues, which can have a huge impact on the disability pay gap. We don't really have enough time to go into that today, but we do want to have more of these conversations going forward. Right now, I want to get into creating accessible workplaces. So Lillie, this is sort of something that since Alex helped with, specifically for neurodiverse colleagues, but how can workplaces create more inclusive spaces for the neurodiverse staff?
I think that having an understanding or being seen to be open to neurodivergence and disability and having open conversations is a big contributor. So when doing our research, we found that ESG groups, or ERG, I'm probably calling it the wrong thing, employee.
I think ERGs are employee resource groups, and ESGs tend to be employee staff groups. So it's the same, really the same thing.
That is right, there where the confusion comes. So if there is not a leader, an organisation leader within those groups, they tend to not be effective at all. So it needs to come from the top in order for people to believe in it and to feel confident and trust that their organisations are open to neurodivergence. We had somebody disclose the other day, not in our organisation, but an organisation that we were working with, and their feedback was that they would never have even dreamed of sharing because of their previous experiences and felt that they needed to shy away from having that conversation and hide it, which for that individual, it was already kind of flagged because of challenges that they were having at work, which were impacting on other people. So for them to come forward and share that because of an open conversation just made the whole process a lot easier to work out what adjustments would make the workplace a much better place for them. And the results of that kind of open conversation within the team as well, it's proven to be to increase productivity, to have a fully inclusive organization, but actually you can see the difference in everybody when they feel like they're all kind of contributing to and a part of making their workplace for everyone. So I think in answer to your question, involvement from leadership is a real key part.
Yeah, definitely. I see a lot of companies where the equality and diversity and inclusion initiatives are being either pushed from the bottom or pushed from the top. And then there's that middle part where it's that leadership, middle leadership section. So you need the CEO and the board to be on board, but you also need those middle managers to be involved. And that's really big. Part of the ERGs that you mentioned, I think they're a really good resource for telling the company what the feelings are for those particular groups and what they need, and creating awareness without having to go through like mandatory training. And then that lets the leadership know, like, right, here's what issues are happening. We can encourage management to go along to these, get some tips, tricks, hear what's going on, reach out to the ERGs and ask for advice and support internally. And then that might lead to looking for formal support from external, from companies like yourself, companies like Eco Group, where they need to do systematic changes. But yeah, like the leadership buy-in for me is step one. If you don't have that, you're going to have a lot of people pushing at the bottom and going nowhere because they don't have a leadership that wants to listen.
And also in parallel to that is within those groups, and the more that we have open conversations about differences and how they present, the less scary they become, and the more kind of normalized within work culture that they are. So somebody asked, or I often get asked, if why it was important to have a diagnosis, or did it make a difference having a diagnosis? And it absolutely did. And it's really important for me, for all of the people who don't necessarily have a diagnosis, or just, I didn't know that I was autistic, and I didn't know that my characteristics represented or kind of sat within a category that could be categorized. And then I could see all of these, I could see all of the symptoms in one place and be like, wow, that's like summed me up. And I've been fumbling through this, trying to find my own coping techniques and strategies to get through life, when actually there's a whole pool of resource which I could have utilized early on. So for other people, helping them identify and understand how their differences present, and that there is support, and quite small and affordable, sometimes free strategies that are just going to help people thrive. But because the normal or the standardized workplaces are set in such a way that they are disabling for people. So a lot of the differences that we present, we hide because they're deemed as unacceptable, whether that's turning up on time, or it's knowing exactly what you're supposed to do, managing a to-do list. These seem like simple, easy things for people to effectively implement in their lives as standard, but they're not.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really conscious of time, and I do want to try and get a little bit of ableism, but I want to let Olga come in on this. Like for you, I suppose this probably speaks more to your previous works in social services, but even from a counsellor, like what do you think needs to be done to create more accessible workplaces?
Oh gosh, it's a long list. As Lillie was speaking, I was just writing things down from my perspective, what I should mention. I don't know if I have enough time this time to mention it all, but I suppose where do I start? I think it's important to say that in every department, in every local authority, the approach to supporting people with disabilities at work is different. It just varies. And the other point, which is important, is that unfortunately sometimes clients are treated differently to the way the workers are treated. That in itself creates kind of not so inclusive society, in my opinion. In regards to the workplaces, well, I would say that induction would be good, you know, for the company to say what they do, where people go to for support. Do they have disability forum in place? Do they have union in place? Do they have health and safety department? What procedures and policies they have in place? Where to go to find them? Are they accessible? Are they easily found? The other thing is it's about management. How much do they know about their managers and an organization? Under the law, they have a duty of care to manage the risks and make sure that the symptoms that people experience don't get worse, or by work they're not So then learning, how do we create the space where the learning is safe, so we can make mistakes and we don't feel judged, we don't feel blamed, we can ask questions, we can learn from each other. So that's a learning space, and it's ongoing. As I say, it's a little bit like reading a book. When I read the book for the first time, I pick up some of the things that I find important at that time. When I refer back to the same book, I no longer find those things as important because I already know them. So I pick up something else in the book that I never noticed before or wasn't registered with me. So it is, for example, with disability, it's ongoing process of learning. And in society, we all have different exposure to that. And for example, some people might have disabilities themselves, they might have family or friends who go through that, or they have colleagues, but some people are not surrounded by people with those challenges. So that can be tricky for them to learn about it. So they need to start from somewhere. And again, they need to feel safe that they can ask questions and learn in a way where they're not judged. What else? I suppose if it's acquired disability, people can be referred to the charities that could help around that. Or, for example, ACAS, they give some advices as to what to do in the workplace. And again, ideally, it would be very good for the workplace to keep the record of the incidents that happen in the workplace and record what might be risky. For example, what is it? Someone tripping over, or someone having repetitive strain injury, or someone, I don't know, what could it be? Any other back problems, for example. Where is it coming from? How can it be managed? What can be put in place to prevent it? I very strongly believe in prevention. So what can be done to prevent it? How can people be educated about certain things? As we go in life, we're so busy, we don't necessarily pay attention to the things that could go wrong, isn't it? We're not very much aware of the risks until, unfortunately, something happens, isn't it? So how do we make people more aware of those things? Because unfortunately, in life, if we look at physical disabilities, as we go older, the risk of acquiring some kind of physical disability, visible or invisible, is increasing.
Yeah, so
for various reasons. So we need to be aware of that. We need to, the earlier we start, the better it is. So not on individual only level, but on the level of the organization as well. Yeah. So there is so much to say. Basically, I'll just quickly mention two things. Yeah, unfortunately, NHS takes a while to diagnose things. So, and unfortunately, that could mean that symptoms could get worse before they can get better. Yeah, and access to work, again, it takes a while to apply, it takes a while for assessment, it takes a while for things to be put in place, to use equipment and work out whether it's working or not, and if there is a need to go back for another reassessment. So all these take time, and of course that creates not only practical time consuming, but also it can be emotionally and mentally draining, again, especially if there is no support. Yeah, that's all. I covered briefly everything.
Thank you. So yeah, you covered things like the delay and getting support, access to work, which is a big part of it, why a lot of companies sort of want to see your diagnosis. They want sort of maybe like, well, what's the doctor saying? So, well, the doctor hasn't really said anything because I haven't actually got my formal diagnosis. I'm going through the process, but the adjustments might help in the meantime. You also touched on the idea that acquired disability increases the older you get. The statistics I read earlier said 19% of the working age population have disability, so 1 in 5, which is likely to be a little bit higher now, considering how we've adjusted our understanding of disability. That the age group for, I believe it's 55 plus, it's actually about 49% of people have a disability if they're over the age of 55. So yeah, the acquired disability jumps up, and it jumps up even higher. I don't have statistics for the 70 or 80 plus group, but I know it's above 50%. It's quite significant, above 50%. So yeah, that issue of disability. And while we think about those people as not being in workplace, a lot of them actually are. Like, a lot of people do tend to work into their old age, beyond pension age. So it's something we need to consider. As I say, I'm conscious of time, but I do really want to sort of touch on the topic of ableism. So, Olga, as succinctly as possible, what is ableism in your world?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I'm the best to describe it, but I suppose it's about what we do and we don't do, and how each party reacts to things, and how it can be considered, and what can be useful and not useful. So I'm trying as much as possible to use the language that is inclusive, because I believe that the inclusion, ideally maybe, needs to be coming from the both parties, isn't it? The person who has with disabilities and the person who's yet to know about that disability. So how do we create this space that is useful for both parties?
Yeah.
You know, how can we do that? So I don't know if I
Sorry,
and I describe it the best.
Again, it's a huge topic in its own, so I just want to briefly touch on it. And Lillie, do you want to sort of give your like understanding of ableism?
So I can give a really succinct example of ableism, which was a member of my own family to me recently, where actually, probably not that one, but I get told often that I don't look autistic. Now, that's a perfect example of where somebody thinks that they're doing me a favor or saying something kind, when actually it's the opposite of that. It's looking at disability as if it is less than being not disabled. So that,
yeah,
in a nutshell, is ableism, and in daily language, which is used often, especially around for people who are not presenting any invisible, I guess is the terminology used.
Yeah, so as I've come from Network Rail previously, a very engineering background, frontline staff, the banter in a depot, or a bothy as we tend to refer to them in the north, it uses a lot of ableist language, and you can actually Google this, and there's tons of people who have produced lists of what is ableist language and what you can use instead. Even words like stupid and crazy, which are so common in our lexicon, can be considered to be ableist, because they rely on like older stereotypes about people who have learning difficulties, who have mental health issues. So yeah, there's those issues as well. As we said, it's a huge topic, so like we're not going to get deep into it. We are coming towards the end of the webinar. One of my lovely colleagues in marketing is going to pop up a feedback poll on the screen. If you could all just fill it in as it pops up. There is. And while that's happening, we do have a question from, sorry, I had the name, Dorinda Johnson. Dorinda, do you want to unmute and ask your question directly?
Sure, I don't mind. I am a facilitator for a diversity and inclusion dialogue program. And what we found as a theme with neurodivergence is the need to have their management understand necessary messaging to the rest of the staff or team if they're not willing to self-identify with the rest of the team. So yes, supervisor, I told you, because you have a need to know in case there's an emergency situation. However, I'm not willing to disclose to the rest of the team. But when you're asked about why does she get a chair? Why does she get, why can the lights be dim? When you're asked these questions about the visible accommodations, for me, it is important to me how you respond to that teammate that I don't want to know. So the theme is that the messaging is also an accommodation, a necessary accommodation, but how do we implore the management, the supervisors, to consider that as an accommodation and get whatever training they need? I hope that makes sense.
Lillie, I think this probably speaks some about what your work is, since it's sort of featuring on the neurodivergent side of things, people not wanting to disclose that element of their identity, but needing those reasonable adjustments that potentially impact their colleagues, or their colleagues see as unfair.
So I don't know what the right answer is to that, but what it immediately makes me think of is, if you're having open conversations with your organization about invisible disabilities and about disability, and having and communicating with everybody about being inclusive, then those kind of questions would, I imagine, there would be less of them, because people would be more exposed to the idea that people might have invisible disabilities and they don't have to disclose, and that's their experience, rather than something that everybody is entitled to know why. That whole thing around people thinking that they should know, or that if they knew that they'd be able, like, we had a very similar conversation recently with somebody who was like, well, feeling entitled that they should know, and it was in hindsight after a whole experience. Well, they're not, and that's an important piece to communicate to people as well. You're not entitled to know what somebody's personal experience is, and in as much as it impacts on, if it doesn't impact on that other individual, I don't think that there is a need to be explaining what adjustments have been put in place and why they've been put in place. So I think that's more around the communication piece to the rest of the team.
Yeah, so that was
the rest of the organisation, sorry.
Yeah, that was sort of my first instinct, was that there's an awareness issue there. So obviously there's confidentiality, you have to respect people's confidentiality, but if people are seeing someone else getting something and their immediate reaction is to be like, well, why? Then the team or the company doesn't have enough understanding of the support that can be put in place for different employees for different conditions. So there needs to be more work done to sort of raise that awareness of what can be done in the team. There's actually a really good answer in the comments from Sophie Colella about creating bespoke support to each person who works with us. So when those challenges are brought up, instead of disclosing that that person has a particular condition, you just say we create bespoke support for each person who works with us. If you require additional or bespoke support, just reach out. And then that's like, it's an individualistic approach for each staff member, which would stop them hopefully stop them asking, well, what's their specific condition? Why did they get that, and why did they get other things? So I think it's two-pronged. It's that making sure that there's an understanding about the different needs of each staff member, and then making sure people are aware of the support they can get as well, without obviously disclosing people's confidential information.
Thank you so much.
I'm really conscious of time. We did get a lot of questions in, and there was one that we briefly touched on earlier on, that was, so what are the limits to reasonable adjustments? I just wanted to make sure we covered this properly, and sort of what Lillie and I have said was that it has to be a consideration around affordability and reasonableness. So like getting someone a £10,000 state-of-the-art computer, is it necessary for their job? Like, how does it actually help their job? I'd love a £10,000 state-of-the-art computer to play games on, but I don't think Matt's going to buy me one. Maybe I'll ask nicely. So that's an affordability question. And then the reasonableness side of things is, how does it impact people around them? That idea of having the curtains closed and creating darkness for that one person in the office when everyone else would benefit from the natural sunlight. There's, as long as the positive impact for the employee doesn't have a negative impact on their colleagues around them, I would say it comes under reasonable adjustments. And as long as, again, it's built into affordability. The access to work route is also a really great way to sort of build in that affordability route. The difference in support that access to work can recommend to people is huge, and there's a range of physical tools, software tools, and even human support that can be provided through that. And that's the human support side that Lillie, correct me if I'm wrong, that's sort of what you specialise in, making sure that human support's provided. I'm going through access to work process at the moment. It is a long process. It's 22 weeks at the moment, up from 8 weeks just last year. This is probably because there's more awareness around it, but also probably because more people are accessing it post-pandemic. But what I learned is what you can get on that. There's all sorts of devices and tablets. So there's, I've forgotten what it's called. It's the writing tablet, so it feels like you're writing on paper. Yeah, that one. It's air gapped, so it doesn't connect to the World Wide Web, but it can be connected directly to your computer, so you can upload things to your computer, but not go on Facebook and distract yourself. So there's lots of tools out there for people, and for me, the limits to a reasonable adjustment, I don't know that there are hard limits. It depends on your organisation, your workplace, and the individual.
Just very briefly to mention, with access to work, as far as I know, if you are self-employed, then obviously there is no cost to you. But if you are in the organisation, then something is contributed by the organisation, and some of it is contributed by access to work. And there is a difference, I think, depending on how long the individual worked for that organisation. As far as I remember, that's how it works.
I think it might have changed then, because my understanding is that it doesn't cost the organisation anything. The assessment is based on the individual. So my assessment would be for me, and what's recommended through that would go. So if I left the group and went somewhere else, that recommendation would come with me, and the new workplace would get support to implement it, just as the old workplace had got support to implement it.
That's right. Up to, I think it's 49 people, and then it becomes there is a cost to the organisation.
So is the limit on how many people can be using it in a company, essentially?
Not how many people can be using it in the company, it's more on the size of the organisation.
Yeah. Yes, and that's another thing that, around access to work, things change quite a bit. And not only access to work sometimes change certain things, but the company who provide certain things, for example, softwares, and how that is used, how many equipments it can be downloaded to. So it's
there are limitations, things. But there are access to work companies out there who specialize in providing understanding around this and helping you access that support as well. We are just a minute over time. I'm going to quickly wrap up this webinar. So just next steps for you as listeners. You can engage with us. We're on most social media sites at the Eco Group. You can join our mailing list or via the website to keep abreast of our latest EDI insights. See some of our older webinars, which are also available on YouTube. We also have podcasts on Spotify, which I'm on at least a couple of times. If you are looking for EDI, or you know someone who is looking for EDI work, recommend us. We are EDI professionals. You've also got Lillie's company, which specialises in neurodiversity inclusion and providing support for neurodiverse staff members. And Olga is a counsellor, so if you need any counselling services, check out Olga as well. And if you want to work with us, that you can arrange a follow-up call with us to speak more about your specific EDI journey. There's the link to the website at the bottom. We're really easy to find, theecogroup.com, or you can send an email to contact@theecogroup.com. Lastly, there's a QR code. If you won't be able to click the link, it's on my screen, but you can QR code that and it'll take you to our website. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd really like to thank my guests, Lillie Jamieson and Olga Chernyavska, for joining me and sharing their insight. If you do want to see more of these webinars, please let us know. I would love to dig more into policy side of disability, and do much more on creating physical as well as virtual inclusion for disability. So please do let us know. And thank you. Have a good afternoon.